Hi everyone and welcome for another Apitherapy video. This time we'll talk about something amazing, very actual. Actually, yesterday I went in town and I saw many people with the mask and with the regular behavior for COVID-19. And of course this is normal, this is actually the norm, and that's what we have to do. I have the luxury of living on the countryside, so I don't see that many people. I'm not often exposed to high level of people with lots of masks around and some kind of stress and weird communication, because with the mask you can't hear as well. Comfort level is not the same. It's kind of odd, and I'm personally not yet used to this. I know that many people are. I'm not. And because I live on the countryside, very simple reason. So I'm not saying I'm against or for it or whatever. This is the norm. This is not my role to go against or for this. It's another topic. I just want to compare two things: how the bees deal with their viruses and how we deal with our viruses as humanity, and see what we can learn from the bees. Two main things, two main topics there. The first one, let's talk about our way of living, our life habits. The bees, they actually, they feed on flowers only. So they go on the flowers, they feed on the nectar in the flower. So a flower itself is always fresh, because the flower won't last forever. It lasts either a couple hours or a few days. And so it's always fresh, nothing dying there, nothing old, nothing, there's not, it's nice, fresh and clear and clean. So they go there and we get that nectar, which is even fresher than the flower itself. So they get really top fresh food, they bring it back to the beehive. And when they collect it, actually, they absolutely absorbed it, they ingurgitate it, and they absorb it, they put it in some kind of a stomach just for that nectar. So they really ingurgitate it, and then they go back in the beehive, and then through Trophallaxis, they actually share it to another bee. So they actually expulse it and they feed it to another bee, another honeybee. And that honeybee will do the same. It will ingurgitate that nectar, and then it will keep it for a little while, not too long, and then it will again give it back to another honeybee. They'll do that a couple times, and then while they do this, they make sure they add all those good enzymes that are in that specific stomach for nectar that they have, and they actually make sure there's lots of enzymes in there, and they also absorb part of the water at that moment that is in nectar. That nectar has to lose a lot of water to become honey. So through that Trophallaxis process, they actually absorb part of the water and they add the enzymes. So they do this, and once it's ready, the last bee will actually put it in honeycomb in a cell, and then they will wait till it matures, it ripens, and when it's ready and it's just at the right moisture, water level, water content, they will cap it with wax. They'll actually use some beeswax, and they'll do a capping on top of that cell, and we'll see the honeycomb as we know it. So this is basically the process. Of course, there's more details, but that's good enough for now. And I'm just explaining this so that you can see and understand that the bees, because of the way of living that they choose, they go always on very pure source of food. They live in a very clean environment. They don't, they always choose fresh things, clean, pure, beautiful. So while they do this, there's not much viruses there. There's not much, big pathogens there. So they don't bring so much of those back in the beehive first. So when you live that level of pure life, let's say, of pure behaviors while you're living, well, then when that is done, you can then share with the others directly. And by sharing with others, you actually increase the level of purity of the food you got, so symbolically of the life you live, because that nectar, once it's turned into honey, thanks to those enzymes, it will last for even more than 4,000 years. They found some honey in the pyramids in Egypt that was more than 4,000 years old. So that's the secret. If you live a really pure way of living, then you can exchange freely, and your exchanges will actually increase the purity of the life you live. This is amazing. If you compare it to what we have now with those masks and everything, it's crazy. We're creating so many barriers, and I understand the principle. I'm not saying I'm against this, and this is not my point at all. I'm just saying, do you see how different that is from, you know, the bees? They share mouth to mouth their food. This is just, and you know, this is amazing because that food comes from their stomach. You know, this is serious. Maybe you will never want to eat honey after that video, but that's another point. So they actually share this, and by sharing what they have in them, they actually help that product, that food. They're not putting bad bacteria, viruses, and so on. You know, they're not scared of sharing because what they eat is so pure that it creates that kind of reactivity chain. It's just amazing what they do. So compared to what we got, so I don't know exactly where COVID-19 come from. There's so many different theories. Some say, we've been eating bats in China or whatever. I don't know exactly where, and maybe another animal. Maybe also some say it's been man-made in laboratories and we've been dealing with viruses and one of them just, you know, got out somehow. It was something intended. Some are saying, my point is not to choose what is the reality there. Basically, all of those options are showing people dealing with things that are way less pure than what the bees are doing. And by doing this, of course, at some point you do get in contact with some viruses, with many, and if you go play yourself in viruses in labs, then of course you go play in the viruses. Then of course, if you exchange with others, well, you spread that virus. It's so obvious. So, same thing, you know, most viruses have been heard to come from animals. You know, from pigs or from chicken or from different source of animals very, very often. So that way of feeding on those, it's not as pure as what the bees are doing. And that maybe through time should teach us something. If we want to share together, maybe we should choose source of food that is really clean and pure, and that because there's always traces of the food that we eat everywhere. So I'm not trying to get everybody paranoid about, I cannot eat meat anymore. I'm just saying this is a way of living. And I'm not saying you have to be scared if you eat meat, not at all. I'm just saying if you deal with the purest food and everything else, activities that you can do, then of course if you're sharing with others, it will be nice and beautiful and all that. But if you don't, you know that animals, well, it's dead animals. So it's, you know, there's ways to keep it good for a while, but it's not something that is very pure. It's actually, it's dying, right? And it's changing fast. So it's not the same level of purity. I'm just outlining this so you can compare those two ways of living and see the consequences of those. The bees, the more they share, the purer it gets because of that way of living. And for us, it's not that way at all. So we create all different kind of processes to separate each other and so on because of that. So that's one thing. And then the other point, it's the ambience that we create. The bees and the beehive, what do? Because they know that even if they go only on flowers, sometimes when they go get their water and so on, yeah, there might be viruses, and of course they might, contract, get in touch with some type of viruses, pathogens and whatnot. So they still need some kind of protection. What do they do for their protection? They go in the trees, they collect resin, they make propolis out of it, and they create a coating of that propolis everywhere in the beehive. That uses the immune system of the trees, so the protection of the trees, those peace guardians, let's say, and they actually put it everywhere as a coating in the beehive, so they feel comfortable, free, safe. That propolis resin will actually, as part of it, will fill the air and clean it from bacteria, viruses, and so on. And it creates a really safe place to live in. And while what do we do when there's viruses, pathogens, bacteria, and so on? Well, we create first an ambience of fear, because we say, oh, it's very dangerous, it kills everybody, and so on. There's fears created. And then we start, separating everybody. We create those masks, distanciation, that 2-meter thing, and so on. I'm not saying it's a bad thing and we don't have to do this, especially if it's the rule where you live. Well, it's the rules. Do what you want to do, but do it safely. And so that's one thing, that fear ambience that we create. And then in that fear ambience, do we create something that will actually help our immune system, make it strong, make us feel protected by trees, those great guardians of peace? Because they really are, they do a lot, those trees, for us. Let's just talk about oxygen, for example. They generate oxygen a lot, so they're very, very important. And so this is a totally different mindset. What type of ambience do you create? Do you get that support from the right element that will be protective and get you feel protected? Or do you create that ambience of fear and you have to separate people and separate everything? It's totally different. So I just wanted to outline those 2 points. The way of living with the pure things, and then the purer your food and your activities are, then the more you share, the better it gets and the healthier it gets. Just like honey that will last for more than 4,000 years. And also that ambience of protection coming from the trees, compared to what we do in society. Well, we eat what we can, and sometimes it's very odd, and that brings in viruses and whatnot. And so that's one thing. And then the more we share, the worse it is. We see now with the mask, it's crazy. And the impression it puts on us is crazy. That's what I mean. And also then the other point, which is the ambience of fear that we create instead of an ambience of protection coming from the natural helpers that are out there. And how could we do this? We're not bees, we don't collect propolis. Well, actually the bees collect propolis. People can actually use propolis to do just the same. They can eat propolis to boost their immune system, to cope with viruses and all this. This is actually proven. There's tons of study on cold, flu, even influenza and so on, how propolis helps very seriously for this, even more than most medicine, like regular medicine, conventional. So this is already proven. There's tons of study on this. Go and read by yourself if you want. So that's one thing. You can also use it in the air through those Propolair. I already talked about those. I'll put a link and you see the video about those. And that's a way to use it in the air you're breathing in. So you're cleaning the air you breathe from that same propolis that the bees are using. So 2 things to, get in line with. How do you feed yourself? What type of activities you do? Do you get pathogens and stuff from that kind of behavior? And also, how do you take care of the ambience you live in to feel safe? 2 things that the bees are educating us a lot on. So hope that enlightens us a little bit more. and gives us some inspiration for future possible reaction to pathogens and so on. Because now we deal with the COVID-19, but who knows, maybe next year there will be another one that will be worse. We need to get ready for this. I mean, we need to make choices in our life so that we don't get stuck with that same type of reaction and fear and separation. I don't want to be wearing a mask all my life. I don't want this. So we have to make good choices as humanity, because I can do all the good choices I want. If everybody else are not doing those choices, well, that won't help much. And now everybody will say the same with the vaccines. And of course, they'll say everybody need the vaccine, so this way we make sure that disease don't come anymore. Wow, what a strategy. For me, it's better to choose with the 2 points I just mentioned, you know, how we live, the food we feed on, we choose, and the ambience of security we create. How would we create that security? Because there will always be new diseases and stuff like that. If we keep living the way we live, we'll always attract new disease and all this, and we'll need more and more vaccines, and there will be always emergency situations, and you know, you see how that thing is endless. Even if you do use a vaccine at some point, well, there will be so many more viruses coming in the future. So this is not such a good reaction. I just want to outline this. Now everybody do his own choice, but I wanted to make that very clear. So thank you very much for listening, and see you another time for another Apitherapy video.